Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. It's been a while since I've posted an update on my muzzleloader project, and the reason it's been a while is that it kind of hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, at this point, in a business sense, I think it's safe to say that that venture has failed. But like so many business ventures that fail and change hands and get repurposed or absorbed into other projects, it's not quite the end of the story. So I'll talk a little more at the end of this video about what the next steps are and where I'm going with the muzzle loaders. But first, I thought it would be worthwhile to share the lessons learned from this project with you, because while this may not have been a profitable venture, I think it was a valuable learning experience. To begin with, the biggest mistake that I made in this venture was trying to do everything myself. In order for any business venture to succeed, whether you're building muzzleloaders or writing software, there's a number of functions that have to be performed, and there's really just too much for any one person to keep track of, let alone to do and do well. So let me talk through the different roles that have to be fulfilled for a company to succeed. First off, there is product development. This is taking your initial idea and transforming it into a product that is at least representative of what you're actually going to sell. Typically beginning with a proof of concept prototype and maybe a couple of iteratively more refined prototypes in between until you get to something that is representative of what you want to mass produce. Now, as an engineer and an inventor, this is the role that I really gravitate towards, and this is really what I focused on during this venture. And for the most part, I'd say that I succeeded in that role. I took an initial idea in my head for a fire control mechanism with really only two moving parts, and based on that idea, I came up with a muzzleloader that I think is totally functional and serviceable and really kind of a fun product to use. Now, the second role is what I'm going to call production management. You've got your representative prototype in hand, complete with documentation and so forth, and now you need to reproduce it in sufficient quantity to be viable on the market and sufficiently efficiently that you can charge a price that will be attractive to potential customers. And because of the chronological relationship between product development and production, that production starts up once product development is complete, it's tempting to think that once your development is complete, your development engineer will just transition into the role of production manager. But it doesn't quite work that way. Running a mass production operation requires a very different mentality than creating an initial prototype. And I found it surprisingly difficult to make that mental transition as I tried to transition from product development into production. Two, setting up production is often going to be one of the most expensive phases of starting up a business venture. And I didn't have the capital to buy a bunch of commercial grade CNC machines or build a factory. So I kind of defaulted back to my product development roots and thought, well, I'll just develop a bunch of specialized jigs and fixtures that we can use to produce these as efficiently as possible with the machinery that we have, which is suitable for one-off prototyping and not really suitable for production. In principle, I succeeded in building a bunch of jigs and fixtures and in producing some muzzleloaders, but in practice, all it really did was demonstrate that this method of production is not commercially viable. This would have been competitive in the 19th century when machine tools were just sort of being invented and this is what people were doing. But by the time we get into the 20th century, where mass production was becoming more commonplace and more sophisticated, this would no longer have been competitive, and here in the 21st century, it's certainly not competitive. So I succeeded at initial product development. I kind of stumbled when it came to setting up production, partly just because it wasn't as much in line with my expertise, and partly because I really didn't have the funding to set up a modern production operation that would have been efficient and competitive in the long run. Well, then the third crucial role for any business venture is distribution. Even if you have a great idea that you turn into a great product and then find a really efficient way of producing it, if you don't have a way to actually sell it to people or otherwise make money on it, then your business venture is kind of doomed. And in my case, by the time I'd gotten through all of the product development and then all of the tooling development and had production up and running such as it was, I just didn't have the mental energy left to do anything about distribution. But I happen to know the proprietor of Dollarhide Mercantile, which was a little online retailer that was starting up here locally about that time. They were looking for products, and so I kind of dumped my muzzleloaders on them and said, "Here you go." Well, no sooner had they made my muzzleloaders available through their online storefront than the company that handled their payment processing went into hysterics, ended up disabling their account, which made their storefront defunct. And although they tried to work through that, tried to find some alternate ways of processing payments, nothing really worked. And at the end of 2021, they officially closed their doors. So with this venture, I basically succeeded at product development. I kind of stumbled when it came to production management, and then I totally fell apart when it came to distribution. And that brings me to what is functionally the fourth crucial role in any business venture, which is strategic planning. In theory, this is kind of optional because if you develop a great product and you produce it efficiently and you're able to distribute it effectively and sell it at a profit, then you should have a profitable business venture. But in practice, that doesn't tend to happen on its own. You need to ask some questions up front, like, is there actually a market for this product? We've got this great product idea, but even if we develop this into something that works, will people want to buy it? If so, what price would they realistically be willing to pay for it? And can we produce it efficiently enough to sell it at that price and make a profit? And by the way, how are we going to raise enough startup capital to set up an efficient production operation in order to do that? So product development, production management, and distribution all really deal with getting work done. Strategic planning deals more with figuring out what work actually needs to be done. Is this particular product actually worth developing, or should you develop something else instead? Is it better to produce it in-house or to contract with somebody else to do the mass production of your product? Is it better to distribute it through your own online storefront or an existing marketplace like Amazon, or just to strictly deal locally, or what? What's your distribution strategy? So in my view, those are the four key roles that have to be fulfilled in order for any business venture to succeed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need a minimum of 4 people in order to pull off a successful business venture. In principle, maybe you identify an existing product that would meet a certain demand, And so you're able to buy it wholesale from a company that has already done the research and development, is already managing production, and then you have it shipped directly from the producer to a fulfillment company that handles the distribution for you. And so you're doing the strategic planning and you've outsourced all of the other functions. And there's a lot of companies that operate that way. But obviously that would not have worked for this. And frankly, I don't know if anything would have worked for this, because when I start to consider the strategic planning type of questions for this project, I don't have a lot of good answers. Hypothetically, if I had a waiting list of people who wanted to buy one of these and were willing to, come pick it up and pay cash, and were willing to pay like $2,500 a piece for them, then sure, I could produce these, one at a time myself and pay myself a decent wage. But I don't think people are going to pay anywhere near that for these, and frankly, I haven't sold enough of them to even have a good idea of what people would pay for these, if anything. So for future business ventures, I'm going to be a little more careful to ask some of these strategic planning questions. Make sure that the venture actually has a reasonable chance of success before I commit much of my time to working on it. And a big part of that determination will be making sure that one way or another I've got people that I can rely on to handle things like production management and distribution. Of course, I should probably clarify that most of the projects that I present on this channel are not business ventures. There's something to be said for just tinkering around in the shop or out at the range and having fun. But what's going to become of the beta pattern muzzleloaders? Because I produced something like a dozen of these, if you include the prototypes, before it became apparent that this wasn't a viable business venture. And I've already got materials from when we were gearing up for production to produce probably at least a dozen more. So I'd like to get some salvage value from all that inventory if I can. And while I'll certainly hang on to a few of these for my own use, I certainly don't need 24 beta pattern muzzleloaders in my own private collection. So I'll probably post a few of these on Gunbroker. In fact, those auctions will probably be live by the time I get this video posted. But probably for the most part, I'll try to deal locally because it simplifies distribution, especially with the guns that are on the longer side, because those are very difficult to ship. I'm not sure if it would be worth taking these to actual gun shows. From what I understand, having a table at a gun show is actually kind of expensive because a lot of the dealers there are expecting to make a significant profit. And I'm not. But maybe some of like the farmer and artisan markets that are a little cheaper to get into would be a viable venue to distribute these locally. I have briefly spoken to the people organizing the Mackay market over in Mackay, Idaho, and they were open to having someone selling muzzleloaders like this at their events. So we'll see what comes of that. I'm still sort of figuring out the details of even the little bit of distribution that it's going to take to liquidate the remaining inventory from the beta pattern muzzleloader project. Of course, the fun part will be when it comes to building out the rest of the raw materials into finished muzzleloaders, especially because that'll give me a chance to tinker with some of the variants that I haven't gotten around to building yet. I definitely want to finish refining the folding stock version of the beta pattern muzzleloader, and I'd like to even try building a double-barreled version. We'll see whether or not that actually comes to fruition. But anyway, that's where I'm at with the beta pattern muzzleloader project. So hope you learned something today, and until next time, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.